We wanted to give you a progress report on this thing called the Scientific Consensus Statement. Many of you in this room, I think, have actually signed this. Others may not be familiar with it. But, in fact, this is something that Governor Brown uses on a very regular basis, both in just sort of off-the-cuff press conferences such as this one that was at LA County Museum, and in just about every press release. He writes about climate change. This is one of the more recent ones, August 20th, talking about the Under 2 MOU, but, you know, I've bolded that called the consensus statement, because this is very much a document that the governor and his staff use to illustrate the scientific consensus, not only on climate change, but on several other issues that we'll point out to you. Now, we've been involved with this. Liz and I have been involved with this from its outset, beginning in about 2012. And we've learned three things, I think, as we've come along this process. And one is that we are incredibly lucky to live in this state with an administration that puts such a high value on science, as we've already heard earlier today, and as this conference illustrates. Secondly, as scientists, we've learned we really do have an opportunity for our science to make a difference to the world. But in order to do that, we have to communicate that science very clearly in ways that people outside our immediate scientific specialties can resonate with. Now, I want to just give you a little background as to how all this came about, and then Liz is going to take over and sort of bring you up to date on where things stand now. But, you know, it's a scientific consensus statement, so it really did start with science, okay, which is a good thing. This was back in about 2011 that a group of 22 scientists from really around the world, this is an international group, held a workshop to try to identify, you know, what is it we don't know about the biology of systems that we should be worrying about with respect to climate change and so on. An outcome was this paper in Nature. But the interesting thing is somehow that resonated very widely in the news media. This thing kind of went viral. It was on the front pages of newspapers really throughout the world. And as a result of that, Governor Brown caught wind of it. And much to my surprise, I was out running one day and my phone rang, and it was the governor on the other end. And he said, what's all this crap about this paper? You know, if these are such big problems, why aren't scientists shouting this out from the rooftops? To which, you know, the reply was, well, I thought we were. And his reply was, well, it's not making it to me. So why don't we do something here that can put together this information in ways that the governor, can use it to move some policy in directions that would help these problems. So these were, through a series of discussions, these are the kinds of things that came out. And the ultimate challenge was, why can't you guys in the scientific community, you guys and women in the scientific community, come up with a concise statement about these problems? You're talking about planetary tipping points. Explain that to people, and solutions that we can then move forward to. So that was sort of the next step. We went back and forth, both with the governor, with Ken Alice, with other people in OPR, to get a sense of what sort of language and so on would be effective. And the upshot was putting together a group of scientists, and there were 16 authors on this thing that came together to sort of craft the document, many of them California scientists, but again, an international group and people outside of California as well, and you may recognize some of those faces there. And this document ended up pointing out that we've got 5 big problems in the world: climate change, obviously a big one, extinctions, loss of natural ecosystems, pollution just about everywhere on the planet, and all of that underpinned by population growth and overconsumption. So this eventually came together in a document that is now referred to as the Consensus Statement, Maintaining Humanity's Life Support Systems in the 21st Century, and notice it's subtitled Information for Policymakers, and it was written specifically for policymakers to get a quick handle on those 5 problems and how they interact. Executive summary is pretty much all anybody ever reads. It's about a 20-page document, but throughout, it's very simple and clear language, devoid of scientific jargon. And once we finished this thing, presented it to the governor and his staff. They took a look at it and said, "Yeah, I think we can use this, but you got to change the font." So that font is personally chosen by Governor Brown. We had the plans to release this thing at the Sustainable Silicon Valley Conference in 2013, and Governor Brown said, "I'd like to be a part of this." So we released it jointly with the governor. At that time, it had been circulated internationally, signed by about 520 scientists who do global change research on these issues. I represented about 42 countries, I think, at that point. So it was a very much, international effort, and these were people in the National Academies of Science of all those countries, Nobel laureates, and so on. So it was a pretty impressive list of names other than mine. And immediately, Governor Brown took that document and began doing things with it. First thing he did is he got it translated into Chinese. He had a meeting coming up with President Xi in Southern California, translated it, formally presented the document to him, and when he gives this document to people, he basically says, do you believe in climate change? If you don't, why not? And if you do, what are you going to do about it? But this is sort of what he uses to make the points. Well, very quickly, so that initial meeting was in June. By September, there was a formal agreement between California and China to mitigate climate change-causing greenhouse gases. Formal MOU was signed and put in effect. October or thereabouts, another one came into effect, this one between California, British Columbia, Oregon, and Washington, and you can read the verbiage up there, but the point I wanted to make is that it's these sorts of consensus documents that become very powerful in saying, yeah, the science is real, and let's do something about it. Just a few details about what's in that Pacific Coast Pact. I don't need to read through all of them. You can do that for yourself. But the point being now, you've got California, the world's 7th largest economy. If you put together these Pacific states, the world's 5th largest economy, you join that up with China, and all of a sudden, you're talking a real difference, okay? Well, this thing has moved on. We now have it translated into several different languages in each of these countries. There are things going on. One of the big agreements, for example, is now between California and Mexico. This will tell you some things that are going on with Nepal and elsewhere, but the point I want to make here is it's used internationally now. There is a website that was launched subsequently, and this is kind of a living sign-on document. You can get all the translations or, all the different versions of it here. But the important thing is that if you haven't signed this yet, you can. And you self-identify as a professional scientist, general public, whatever. But at this point, there's 75 countries represented by the signatories. And as I say, the more signatures, and particularly the more scientists who get on this thing, the better off it's going to be. One of the remarks the President Xi made was, "Give me this document with 10,000 signatures, and I can really make a difference." At this point, then, I'm going to turn it over to Liz. Not only has this thing been used in California, but it's really gone a far ways outside now.
So what you're looking at is something called a mind map. And what I want to do is follow Tony and not just tell you what Governor Brown has done, but I want to tell you how transformative this particular document was for us as well in our communication of science. This is the state of kind of what we had done with the consensus statement. At the top, you'll see the tipping point nature paper, and then it points to the center, which is the consensus statement. So it came from the nature paper. And then in yellow on the right side, you'll see basically Governor Brown and kind of the things that we learned that he had done with it. And then virtually everything else on here is what we've done with it. And the point, I'm going to just take you through a couple of these things to give you an example about how powerful just 20 pages, and really, as Tony said, that one executive summary has been for starting conversations, continuing conversations, and action around the world. So the consensus statement, what you'll see here in the foreground is Mikel Portilius. He's one of the co-authors of the consensus statement. And here he is giving the statement as well as a letter from Governor Brown to His All Holiness Bartholomew I, which happened in 2013. And this man is also known as the Green Patriarch. So you've probably heard a lot about Pope Francis and what he's been doing this summer, but this man has really been at the forefront of leading around 300 million people in the world. He's the leader of the Orthodox Church, and he has really been advocating for some sort of action on climate change and really been very forward-thinking. So this statement has reached diverse constituencies such as him. And one of the things that I've been very interestingly involved with, and it came about in basically because of my social media, because of tweeting and an op-ed I had in the New York Times, that this relationship with leaders in Nepal has been now ongoing for the last couple of years. It's been made even more important because of the earthquake. But basically, they are considering using the consensus statement as part of the foundation for a new constitution they're writing in Nepal. And you'll see here I bolded this consensus for action. It's basically underscoring that the development in Nepal cannot be at the cost of air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, or the Nepal we will leave behind for the future. On this, we hope we're in consensus. What the Constitution has in it right now is wording that says every Nepali has a right to clean air and clean water, and in fact, they have a responsibility to make sure that happens. You'll see here Minister of Parliament Gangan Thapa. He is the Minister of the Environment, and I Skyped into a World Environment Day that was sponsored by USAID, the U.S. Ambassador to Nepal, WWF, etc. Very exciting dialogue, and again, it's the fact that Nepal wants to use science as a basis for their policy. This has gone further, and now we have established and helped a relationship between Governor Brown's office in the state of California and Nepal as well. In addition, I was lucky enough to, Tony actually came with me on this meeting. We met with the national security community in Washington, D.C. and presented them with a consensus statement. It was just a stunning meeting. And I point out to you, all of you, the CNA, and I'll talk to you about the most recent 2014 report. But this is a group, it's a bit like a think tank, and what they do is they advise the military and the National Security Agency in the U.S. This is a group of retired admirals and generals, very high-level admirals and generals, and they have basically made climate change the center of their new report. The National Security and Accelerating Risk of Climate Change report came out in 2014. This is after we met with them. The header here is that climate change impacts transcend international borders and geographic areas of responsibility. And I just want to give you a little bit of a highlight of some of the wording in here. This is an intro to the report that's signed by former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta and former Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff. This update of this report serves as a bipartisan call to action. These are arguably some of the most right-wing kind of advocates that we have, and yet they say that climate change is one of the largest national security risks. It makes a compelling case that climate change is no longer a future threat. It's taking place now. It observed that climate change serves as a catalyst of conflict in vulnerable parts of the world, and that projected changes in global migration patterns, something that's in the news virtually every day in Europe, will make the challenges even more severe. In addition, they point out the susceptibility Americans have, and in fact their responsibility to thinking about and anticipating the susceptibility Americans have. 3.7 million people live within 1 meter of high tide, and the lead author of this report, General Gordon Sullivan, said, speaking as a soldier, we never have 100% certainty. If you wait until 100% certainty, something bad is going to happen on the battlefield. So the point here is that these military leaders think at the temporal scale that's necessary to handle climate change and the spatial scale, i.e. the world, something that many people in the U.S. are not really grappling with just yet. They also point out that international impacts are critical. Projected climate change is a complex, multi-decade challenge. Without action to build resilience, it will increase security risks over much of the planet. It will increase threats to developing nations in resource-challenged parts of the world, something that's already happening. And it will also test the security of nations with robust capability, such as the U.S. These are really important and very powerful comments, and I encourage all of you to go and look at this report. We also were able to meet with members of the security group in the White House, particularly Alice Hill, and we met with some of her staff that deal with migration policy. In our migration policy, we have nothing about climate migrants. How do you anticipate this? How do you write the wording into it? What are we to do? What's the international community and our national community to do about this? We said, what can we do? And she said, we need a map. Something that I can point to when I run into legislators, let them know about the environmental issues that are confronting their own districts. And so I went back to Stanford, and I gathered together and began a class within a week, started at this class using students that enrolled, and basically what we did is we built a map. We beta tested this with California. So this is one screenshot of what's called the California Story Map. It's now online at the OPR, the Office of Planning and Research at the Governor's Office. This is just a screenshot, and what this map is a set of thousands of stories by Californians about their own, about their issues that are confronting them as people, as business leaders. It's from a stakeholder's perspective to a stakeholder. And it encourages, it highlights the 5 issues that Tony discussed in the consensus statement. Climate disruption, population change, biodiversity loss, pollutants, and invasives and disease in California. Every one of these dots on here is a different stakeholder, and there are several different maps for each of these headers. This past year, we developed a U.S. story map. This fall, this will be presented to Alice Hill in the White House. It has several thousand data points, again, using these same 5 criteria, and this is extraordinarily powerful. You'll see population, biodiversity, pollution, climate, and invasives. It allows people one-stop shopping to find out what's going on, where you want to know information about. The California story map, of course, needs to be updated constantly, and what we're working on this summer is developing it so that basically the community can upload information about California. So we're working to kind of launch this to K through 12 educators so that they're able to use this kind of story map about environmental change, not only to teach the students about what's happening, but to communicate California's issues to the rest of the world. And finally, the U.S. story map itself was just an extraordinary opportunity for teaching. This is a shot of the students in their class using they did podcasting, they did interviews with people around the country talking about agriculture and how climate is confronting their livelihoods, and all of this information ended up on a story map, which soon will be launched. So I want to summarize by saying that, we've learned a lot in this couple of years. And the most important thing that even as a scientist, just publication in a scientific journal is just not enough. It's just the very first step, the foundation of good science. You've got to learn how to communicate outside the ivory tower. And I found even communicating within the ivory tower. There are a lot of us scientists that don't even communicate well to each other. I challenge you all to work on that. It's really critical for communicating and for translating what you know. The other thing that we found is that dialogue turns out to be more important than advocacy. We all have causes and we all have things we want to see change, but actually sitting down and listening to stakeholders, to policymakers, to business leaders about what ties their hands and what doesn't, about what are the multiple things they have to balance. This has just been an extraordinary relationship we've had with the governor's office, and I think a lot of it stems from the fact that we're both willing to learn from each other. And then finally, again, as Tony said and many people have also said, it's just we are so lucky to be in a place where our policy is really founded on good, sound science. And with that, we'd like to open it up to any questions if you have them. Thank you for your attention. Microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Levon Stone. I'm the Executive Director of the Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network. I am really glad to be here because I travel around the country and I see these kinds of forums. Now everybody is concerned and the new buzzword is climate change. It's where all the money is going to redirect how we deal with our waste, our energy. But the people who are in the communities, the disadvantaged communities that have to wait on our decision makers to tell us what they're going to do, these are the people that's being left out of the process all the time. The stakeholders, these are the stakeholders that are not at the table. And usually they're in a little group somewhere else off to the side, but they're not really communicating with the community that is making the worldwide, the global, the national, the statewide, and the county decisions. And this needs to change. It's been going on for a very long time, especially with the military bases. And right now we're supposed to have all this clean air. We have open air prescribed burning. And everybody says, oh, well, that's somebody else's thing. It always turns out to be somebody else's thing. When is this going to change is what I like to know. And I see that there's this symposium that we're having. Nobody really reached out to the African American communities, to the organizations that are usually in the dark and is never in the light, that's never at the table. You get somebody that supposedly represents in a job, but it never really reaches where it's supposed to reach. And until that changes, all this is theatrical as far as I'm concerned.
So thank you for your comments. I'd like to actually say that there's a lot in what you said. And the environmental justice issues, for example, are really enormous. And one of the things we've done with the U.S. story map is make a point of having our underlying layers really focus on, in fact, the map that was up there, I had the social susceptibility actually as an underlayer. But we've been able to put not just population density, but average income. We've been able to put all sorts of other issues, and there are very definite environmental justice issues that are confronting particular parts of the South and the West that have to do with basically sea level rise. And so there really are ways to think about this, but I completely agree that there are some missing voices at the table.
And I'd just like to know when that is going to change, because I've been running around looking for who's putting on this symposium and trying to find out why we're not included. I'm told it's in stone and the agenda is set, and that's the way all the decisions are made. The agenda is already set, the decisions are already made, so you're useless.
Thank you for the words earlier. I was very taken by the use of educational process to bring a broader story to the conversation. And I wanted to suggest that beyond that, there could be, and I think should be, a process of integrating alternative futures, whether it's energy, environment, into course curricula from K through university. I mean, it's already happening in universities, but it really hasn't penetrated deeply into K through 12, for example, or community colleges, so that students are aware of their environment with a scientific perspective that's appropriate for their age level. I think that will be transformative in the future in having educated citizens who can make good decisions. And beyond that, educating them about technologies and, I suppose, policy and legal structure that promotes, this end goal of a just, sustainable Earth.
So thank you for that comment, too. And I'll just follow up and say that actually the demand came from the K through 12 educators when we released this map for California, and that there is, and it's something that I sense in my undergrad and grad students as well. There is a huge demand for service. Our young people really want to know more, and more importantly, they want to do more. And so by being able to put this tool in their hands, there's still a lot of bugs to work out, but being able to put this tool in the educators' hands, it means that those students are actively researching their communities, they're understanding what the challenges are, and I think they're going to make better informed citizens. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and I will just add to that those efforts, in fact, are very much underway now, and I think we're going to start seeing integration into the K through 12 curriculum and so on very soon. Two things that come to mind. One that Liz and I were involved with Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who have a huge outreach program for high school students where they actually develop curricula that ends up in the AP curriculum. So we were involved in a series of lectures and other activities that go out to over 10,000 high school teachers, have a reach of millions of students that are on exactly these issues. The other one I'll mention is at Berkeley right now, there's a group developing something called the Understanding Global Change program, which is a K through 12 outreach. And this is an extension of other programs such as that are already in place that have hits of like 3 million hits a month. So yeah, it's happening, and I think the awareness is going to start to grow soon.
Hi, my name is Nidhi Kalra. I'm from the Brand Corporation. I had a question about the stories. I mean, stories are absolutely terrific for reaching people emotionally on a very important topic. But one of the challenges that we have as scientists when we talk about the stories associated with climate change is that of attribution. When someone says, well, did climate change cause this problem that we're facing or that one? I was just wondering if you can speak to if and how you deal with the issue of attribution when you talk about local stories of how climate is affecting people's lives.
So in the consensus statement, we actually rely very heavily on IPCC and primary scientific literature. And, you know, of course, we all have the mantra of you can't attribute any single storm to. But, I mean, it's actually very powerful to point out in the United States in the last 10 years, we have had more billion-dollar weather events, or twice as many billion-dollar weather events as have been averaged for the previous 50 years. So I think just simple statistics and communication that way actually goes a long way with people.
The other thing I'll say is that being able to understand your audience, this is something Steve Schneider, you know, has always said. He was a good friend of ours, and he's like, know your audience, right? And so being able to get in the mind of the people you're talking to. So very often it means what are the local issues that they're confronting? And in California, this is why the story map is so valuable, because the issues in Humboldt County are completely different from those issues in Joshua Tree, for example. And so being able to talk to the stakeholders, talk to the public in these places and say, what are the things you've noticed? How is this manifesting itself? They're just very powerful. So get local is what I would say is the most important way to really connect with your audience. That's often the hardest thing to attribute, right?
Hi, Ray Tingle with Sierra Club, California. First of all, thank you so much for your leadership in putting this consensus statement together. And Sierra Club actually has cited the consensus statement. Some of its advocacy will do so more with our dialogue in the future. But the question I have is, in light of the resonance and support you've gotten for this, I think that the document's about 2 years old now. Has there been any thought given to coming up with an updated document that might even be more pointed, more directed on the alternate paths we have and the sense of urgency and how much we really have to change things to deal with this issue?
I guess the short answer to that is no. We haven't given a lot of thought to coming out with another version or something, but I will say that in the existing document, it is very clear what the paths we need to take are in terms of, or what the destinations we need to get to are. For example, with climate change, you know, we'll read it by X% per year for the next 50 years, or we're not going to make it. So those statements are in there for each one of the issues. And as to how we get there, that really, I think, is where Liz was talking about not going too far into the advocacy of one path or another. There's a whole range of solutions, and lay off a broad brush solutions, but it really depends on the individual constituencies and so on, what's going to work in a given place.
Hi, my name is Ms. Margaret Gordon. I'm with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. I am the co-founder and co-director of this organization in West Oakland. I think this represents community engagement when you say that it's very difficult to go beyond outreach to community. The community is always suspicious of any academia coming in the community because you have a past practice of using us as experiments. We don't want to be experiments. We want to be partners in the process. And the project is designated by our planning, not just your planning. And I think that's one of the critical things, I think that's in this audience. How many people have a relationship that are scientists, have real relationships with the impact of the most vulnerable communities to come up with their plans that they insert into your plan. I think one of the critical things is how genuine you are, how open you are, how accountable you are, how transparent you are, and how you go share the funding that you got for your project. I think all those things need to have a better criteria when you start wanting to have those relationships and build those relationships for the long term. I think it's inappropriate to talk about how hard it is just outreach. We don't want outreach. We want real solutions and concrete ideas that give us beyond just surviving, but we also want to have sustainability. So let's be very clear when you put out those things about outreach. It's no more outreach. We're talking about a plan of who's going to be living in certain communities throughout California. And this room is not really a representative of my community and what I live as a representative of who is being impacted and who is not. So where's the justice piece in this also? So let's clarify how you using terms about outreach. It's beyond outreach. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment.
My name's Eleanor Torrez, and I'm from San Bernardino County, and I'm wearing a lot of hats here. In a previous life, I was a PIO officer for NASA for the Viking mission to Mars. So I understand this whole thing about the messaging very well, particularly when you're having to translate the science to a community and what the lady expressed earlier. I think it's really, really important because when I do look at this room, there is a problem here where there are not the people who really speak to the message or can speak to the message. I love the previous speaker this morning from the plenary who said that we are the convergence of policy, science, and religion. And we have to learn how to speak all those languages. And we have to learn how to speak the languages of the disadvantaged. We're very fortunate in our organization because we do have the science emphasis, but what we're finding out, and you're absolutely right, the K through 12 component is huge. But the other piece to this is the opportunity for participatory research as well. And the opportunities are opened up to bridge those technologies like Esri's data set portals, for instance, and combining them together to work with K through 12, for instance. We're trying to do that on a county-wide level. But I understand the frustration of disadvantaged communities and many of the communities I've worked in. Oftentimes I've heard from researchers saying, you know, you really can't speak to the research to the community because you're never going to understand it. But if you really want to see an application to your research, you really want to see the implementation, you really need that community engagement. And communities are really tired of being dictated to and lectured to. They want to be part of the solution, and they're really capable of being a part of that solution.
Thank you. All right, thanks very much. So it is now one hand, and I think.
First, I'd like to thank our luncheon speakers and the people who made comments. Thank you very much for participating. And we are transitioning right now to the afternoon session, and so in this room is water resources in California, drought, extreme events, and management options. And in the neighboring classroom is the future climate impact and adaptation options for natural and managed ecosystems. Thanks very much.